Welcome to Comics Bazaar, the channel of comics commentary and arcana. This video features the Uncanny X-Men number 231, cover dated July 1988. This cover features Colossus and his sister Illyana, aka Darkchild, and various of the New Mutants including Danny Moonstar, Rain and Cannonball there, lying unconscious, and Colossus battling the demon Sim on the cover. And the cover is by Rick Leonardi and inked by Dan Green. So let's open this one up. This story is actually 31 pages long. There's 31 pages of interior story, but the same cover price of $1. So this was very much value for money at the time it came out. So the story opens in a type of fairy tale scenario of Illyana being gifted an apple by this hand here, this crone's hand, and she's referring to the person who's speaking to her as grandmama, and going out into the world at long last, ready for or ready and dressed for dinner. And we're going to find out a lot more about what's going on there within the issue. So the story is set, as the editorial note makes clear, before after events in New Mutants number 66, but presumably sometime after the events of Uncanny X-Men 230. So the X-Men are here in the Australian outback in the Northern Territory, and the whole world presumes them to be dead on the basis of what was televised at Dallas, Texas, Eagle Plaza, Dallas, Texas, in Uncanny X-Men 227. So here we have this splash page by Rick Leonardi, inked by Dan Green, of Colossus taking out his frustrations on the rocks in the desert. So the creative team is Chris Claremont, writer as always, Leonardi, penciler, Dan Green, inker, Tom Orzechowski, letterer, and Glynis Oliver, colorist. So there's a little encounter here between Rogue and Colossus in the desert, and we get something typical of Claremont around this time, where all the characters are somewhat highly sexed. So Rogue is thinking to herself here, "Oh lordy, big guy, do you have the slightest notion how good you look? Yum." And Colossus, though, is super serious, and part of what he's serious about is he's struggling with the idea that he can't be with his sister, that his sister believes him dead, and he's worried about his sister and what's happening with her. So also in the desert, in the hot desert, his metallic organic steel skin is super hot to the touch. And when he takes out his sketch pad with a drawing of his sister, the heat from his fingers set the sketch pad alight, and the drawings are all burnt up, which he's very upset by. Now, Gateway is witness to this, and that point is going to become relevant later on in the story. So next what happens is Storm comes on the scene, and she uses her weather powers to cool down Colossus's organic steel skin, and then she argues with him, or not so much argues with him, but she makes the case again that that the decision to let the world believe that the X-Men are dead is the best thing to do. She says, "I do not mean to be cruel, but as far as the world is concerned, we X-Men are dead. Because our foes believe that, as well as our friends and family, we have an unparalleled opportunity to strike at them without fear of imperiling those we care for. Cast that aside, and all our work, our sacrifices, will have been for nothing," Colossus concludes. So he seems to accept what she's saying, but really he remains perturbed. And Wolverine takes his side in the continuation of the discussion later that night. And we have this little domestic scene of the X-Men washing up with Longshot handing the dishes to Dazzler there, Storm using her weather powers to rain on the dishes, and then Madelyne, Pryor doing the washing, or the drying up rather. Dazzler also takes Peter's side, that she's got a mom and a sister, and she thinks she knows what Peter's going through. She knows what's sensible and rational and necessary, but she likes to think she also knows what's right, and that they should let him go and be with his sister as part of the New Mutants. And at this moment, and Havok also chimes in and agrees. And at this moment, Gateway enters the X-Men's home in the hotel formerly occupied by the Reavers, and he wants something from them, but he doesn't speak. So they go up upon his hilltop, and he spins his bull roarer, and he sends Colossus off. And where does Colossus end up except in Limbo, just as his sister, in her Darkchild demon sorceress form, is casting a spell to aid her in her fight against Sim and his horde, as she intones here, by all the spirits of the abyss, by heart, blood and soul fire, I summon, and Colossus pops out at just the exact moment. So she believes him to be a conjuration from her spell, but it is the real Colossus. And so he decides to continue feeding into her belief that he is an incantation, an enchantment, a magic spell that she's conjured, rather than her actual brother. So the attack on Sim continues, and Colossus goes into action in defense of his sister, and she warns him against touching Sim, because Sim is a carrier of the techno-organic virus, but Colossus isn't affected, as he shouts here, surprise demon, your power appears to have no effect on me. And then he thinks to himself, and this is a handy explanation for the reader, because my armored body has become as impervious to magical attacks as to physical ones. And we saw that in terms of Colossus going up against the adversary in the Fall of the Mutants storyline, where the adversary was powerless against the iron in Colossus's organic steel. So Illyana gives out to Colossus here, don't you dare ever go into action without my permission. I summoned you. Under the rules of sorcery, you have to do what I say. So this is the point where he decides to dissemble that he is indeed her true brother, and to make her continue thinking that he is in effect an embodied spell that she's summoned. So then she explains what's going on, that Professor X's school was invaded by creatures from a book that she was reading, first and foremost, Mikhail Bulgakov's classic novel, The Master and the Margarita, a real novel, and these are real characters from the novel, and that ultimately these characters are working for a figure from Russian folklore and fairy tale, Baba Yaga. So readers of Mike Mignola's Hellboy will be very familiar with his version of this character. So Baba Yaga is a witch, and she is getting ready to cook and eat the New Mutants, the current residents at Professor X's mansion. So once she's explained all of that, they decide to return to the X-Mansion, which has been transformed by Baba Yaga's magic, and Colossus drops down into the mansion itself in his armored form, sees the New Mutants who've been strung up, awaiting cooking, and begins to tackle Baba Yaga's heavies here. in this panel. So what happens is Baba Yaga makes a run for it, and he follows her up the stairs, but can't make his way in through this door, and she's about to kill some of the younger pupils at the school. It looks like rain here, and he has been unable in the continuity to transform at will into his flesh and blood form. So it takes absolute willpower here for him to make the transformation in order to slip through the door, which he does. But once he's done that, he becomes vulnerable to Baba Yaga's magic. So he'll only be able to resist her if he can turn again by will back into his form of iron, which he does. And then he is able to defeat her because of her vulnerability to iron. And so that puts an end to her. And then Illyana uses her magics to take care of the rest of the demons present. And then we have this very emotional climax to the issue where Illyana is disturbed by her dark child demon sorceress form. And even though she believes Colossus to be a spell, she's ashamed of her appearance. And this is an opportunity for him to reassure her and to tell her that the essence of being good is making deliberate, conscious choices to be good, because Illyana maintains that her dark side is her essential side. And he says it doesn't matter if she keeps failing because she's trying to become something better. So a pointed ethical lesson at the end of this little story. And as he says farewell to her in the teleportational portal conjured up by presumably Gateway on the other side, he says, reality sometimes is not so important as the dream, the ideal that gives it meaning. What is not without on the facade can often be found within. Remember that, he says to her, and remember him. And so off he returns to Australia. And so Illyana takes to heart the lesson, and she resists the temptation to cast a very dark spell to bring Peter back to life, and concludes that that even though no price was too high to save her friends, somehow she thinks she's got away with saving them without paying. But she's of the opinion that she wouldn't be so lucky again in the future. So there's some foreshadowing there in respect of upcoming storylines for Illyana. And then we have this one-page epilogue where it turns out that Sim wasn't defeated at all, that so long as one iota of his techno-organic being survives, he can regenerate from that in Limbo. And also what he talks about here is that Illyana's spellcasting has loosened the boundaries or borders between Limbo and the earthly world. And so magical creatures from Limbo are finding their way into our world. And ultimately he predicts that although Colossus and Illyana have won this battle, Sim will win the war. And then the issue concludes with an ad for the next one, Earthfall, which will feature the return of the Brood and also Mark Silvestri. So that's a little indication there that already the X-Offices are getting wind of the fact, I'm sure from fan letters, that Silvestri's art is highly appreciated. So he's going to return and provide the art for the 3 parts of the Brood storyline. And just one thing I want to note about Leonardi's art here is it's very impressive, inked by Dan Green, as I said earlier. And thinking about it, I think that his style for me is very reminiscent of and seems to be inspired by Walt Simonson above all, with little touches of Art Adams as well. But Simonson, I think, is at the core of Leonardi's style. What do you think? Let me know in the comments. So I hope that you enjoyed this video on Uncanny X-Men 231. If you did, please like the video. And if you haven't done so already, please subscribe to the channel and stay tuned for more content like this.